Today at Humber News, we have a very special interview. I'm sitting down with Premier Kathleen Wynne. Premier, welcome to Humber College.
Thank you, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, your visit here today started with a tour of our campus. I'd love to get your impressions.
Well, first of all, it's beautiful. I haven't been here. I did work here for a year many years ago.
Oh, really?
1983, 84. So it's changed enormously, and beautiful buildings. I was into the student services.
The LRC Center.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and had an opportunity to speak to some of the students in the common space that's open 24/7, which is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and apparently it's busy at 4 a.m., which is remarkable. And then I had an opportunity to visit the usability lab, the mobile lab, which was fascinating. Some of the things that the students are developing to really help people in their lives, some of the technology, and the fact that it can move around and that versatility, it was terrific. So there's a lot going on at Humber, clearly, and it's great to be able to talk to some of the students.
Now, I have to ask, when you were working here, what was your position?
I was teaching a language skills program for students who were upgrading, getting into a course, but needed some writing skills and language upgrading.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, this year, Ontario community colleges are celebrating their 50th anniversary.
Indeed.
In that time, Humber has developed into a polytechnic institute. So I would love to hear how you think community colleges have contributed to Ontario's workforce.
Well, I think community colleges filled a very important gap and created space at the same time. So when Bill Davis had William Davis had the vision of creating community colleges, he really saw the necessity of linking education more closely with the labor market and the workforce. And I think that Humber's a great example of that, because the work that's being done here is really about preparing young people, preparing students for the work world, and preparing them to change the working world and create jobs as well. So I think that we need to celebrate that in Ontario. We need to celebrate 50 years of that relationship between the working world and the labor market, and these terrific institutions that have evolved over the last 50 years.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned Bill Davis, because Steve Paikin recently wrote a piece where he actually compared the two of you. I would love to hear how you felt about that comparison.
Well, only complimented, because Bill Davis is, we're not of the same political stripe, but we have talked a lot, and I have a huge respect for him. You remember when I was in school and I was growing up, Bill Davis was the Premier of Ontario. He had been the Minister of Education previously, and so from my perspective, his particular way of looking at Ontario and the optimism of that time is really something that I like to emulate. And from time to time, he will call me and say, he'll give me advice on various things, and he reminds me that we're not of the same political stripe, that I am misguided, but he and I still can have good conversations about how important particularly education is, because that was for him the foundation of our society, and I believe the same thing.
That's great. Now you're spending the entire week visiting Ontario campuses to chat with students. Has anything stood out to you from what you've heard from students so far?
So I just started today, and this is the second time I've done a campus tour around the province. And what always strikes me is the diversity of experience and background, and the really intelligent questions that students ask. I like to engage with young people because I find it inspiring. It helps me to think about the things we should be focusing on. And I also want to make sure on this campus tour that students know about our changes to student assistance, because one of the things that I asked about a lot is affordability of education, affordability of post-secondary education. And we know that students from low-income backgrounds are participating in post-secondary at about half the rate of students from high-income backgrounds. So that gap is unacceptable. So the changes we're making to make sure that students who really need it are going to get free tuition as of September 2017, that is about closing that gap and making sure that everyone who's qualified in Ontario has access to a college or a university education.
Absolutely. I know Humber, I'm sure, is looking forward to 2017 in September when we have all new students coming in. Now, I'm curious, just to clarify for the student audience that we have, the students who benefit from your new plan will mostly still be expected to contribute about $3,000 of their own money towards their education. So what is that cost covering?
So let me just step back and say what the program is. So what we've done is we've made a priority of providing free tuition or better than free tuition to students who qualify. So what that means is for about 150,000 students who are from families of $50,000 or less, or even between $50,000 and $90,000, there will be many students who will have free tuition or better than free tuition. And then for students from families up to $160,000, which is what our 30% off grant actually supported, those students, none of those students will see a reduction in their support. So we've made a decision to target students who need that support the most, and that means low income and middle income families. The qualification of the $3,000, there will be a conversation that students will have with the OSAP assessors, and the expectation is just that there will be some ability for students to earn some money to make a contribution to their education.
Right now, you spent time as a school trustee and as a Minister for Education.
I did.
So is this a plan you've been looking forward to seeing through since you were in those roles?
I would say that this is something that has evolved over time. We've made a lot of changes. When we came into office under the previous premier in 2003, under Dalton McGuinty, all student grants had basically been done away with. There were only loans in place, and so the first thing we did was start to bring back a program of loans, of grants, because there had only been loans in place. And so we've been increasing accessibility throughout our term. But when I became the premier and was meeting with student groups, actually, it was student groups who said to us, you've got this 30% off tuition grant, and that's great, but there is a group of students who actually need more than that. 30% off tuition is not enough for them because they don't have enough to contribute. Their families can't take part in the way that they need to. And so, you need to look at those, because what was in place were tax credits for wealthier families, and we made a decision that we would reorient the system and put that money into grants for low income. So really, it was working with students groups, particularly USA, that helped us to get to this place. The College Students Alliance has also been a consistent support for us. I started my time as an MPP as the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, and I can remember sitting with the College Student Alliance and hearing from them the particular concerns about college students. So it's been an evolution over the last decade or so, and I'm really thrilled that we've gotten here.
And now that we are here, are you looking at the next steps in this evolution, or are we just handling where we are for now?
Well, right now we want to make sure that the implementation is smooth and that everybody who needs and who qualifies for the program actually gets the Ontario Student Grant. That's what our focus is on right now. And then we'll need to assess. These are, as I say, these are programs that evolve. And so we'll need to pay close attention to who's actually getting what they need, where are there still gaps, for whom are there still too many barriers, because there are financial barriers, but there are also psychological barriers to going to post-secondary. If your family hasn't participated in post-secondary, there's less chance that you will, and so we need to make sure that the things that we do actually bring in kids who might not otherwise consider going to college.
Now, to shift gears a bit, something I would love to hear your words on. A lot of young people right now are feeling a bit disheartened by the recent U.S. election. As somebody who has really thrived on a progressive platform, are you worried about a lapse in social progress?
I have said all along that I found much of the rhetoric that took place, that was in the political discourse during the American election, very disturbing. I did. I can't pretend that I'm happy that we're hearing misogyny and racism and exclusion and division as sort of the tone. I find it very distressing. Having said that, I believe that it's my responsibility, and all of us who believe that we have made progress over the last 50 years, that we have gotten to a better place in terms of our expectation of each other. It's our responsibility to continue to voice those values, and to really be very clear that we don't accept that it's inevitable that somehow we're going to fall back, and that somehow all of the progress that we've made is going to be lost. I just don't accept that. I believe that we have made some assumptions about how much progress we have made, and that somehow we assumed that the work was all done, and that we were being inclusive, and that everyone felt comfortable with where we had landed. And I think what we've seen in the American election is that wasn't the case. That there are people who don't feel that we've been on the right track, who feel that they, for whatever reason, are not on the same page as maybe the rest, others of us. That there are divisions that we haven't acknowledged, and so I think if anything, we can learn from that. But I'm not giving up on the values that I've been fighting for since I was 15 years old. When I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s, and I was born in 53, and we had women's lib at my high school, and I can remember being shouted at by girls and boys who were threatened by that notion. And I learned very early that to take positions that are going to push the envelope, but are going to push social norms, are not always going to be popular, and I'm not giving up on that. I believe that we have to hold on to those values if we're going to have a safe society for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for those words, Premier Wynne, and thank you for taking the time to come in and visit us here at Humber College.
It's my pleasure, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.